Hello and welcome, whoever you're joining me. And I'm going to start in the middle of the daf because that's where I'm up to. So, doing a Chullin from the Kon Talmud Bavli Steinfeld edition, and I'm in the middle of 19b, 19a, sorry. So it says, the Gemara objects and say it is indeed said that Rabbi Hanina ben Atignas agreed with Rabbi Yossi, son of Rabbi Yehuda. The Gemara responds, if so, the formulation of the Bride should have been Rabbi Hanina ben Atignas testified about it. Since the opinion of Rabbi Hanina ben Atignas was introduced merely with the term testified, apparently he disagreed with all of the other opinions. The Gemara concludes, and the halacha is in accordance to the opinion of Rabbi Hanina ben Atignas, as Rav Naaman holds in accordance with his opinion. The Mishnah cites a dispute between the rabbis who hold that in a case where one slaughtered within the large upper ring and did not leave a thread breadth of the entire surface of the ring, the slaughter is not valid. And Rabbi Yossi, son of Rabbi Yehuda, hold that even if one left a thread breadth over the majority of the surface of the ring, the slaughter is valid. Appropriate to that, Rav Huna said that Rav Asi says, the dispute is only in a case where one cuts 2/3 of the windpipe within the ring and then divert the knife upward toward the head of the animal and cut the remaining 1/3. As the rabbis hold that we require the entire slaughter to be performed within a large ring, and Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda hold the halacha state of its majority is that of its entirety. So even though it hasn't cut that part in its entirety, it's still treated halachically that it is the majority, and that is the entirety because the majority was cut. But if one diverted the knife upward toward the head of the animal, cut 1/3 of the windpipe, and then cut 2/3, so the footnote here, cut 2/3 and diverted 1/3, diverted 1/3 and cut 2/3, it shows the direction of slaughter going from up to down. In point 1, properly cut the first 2/3 and diverted the final third. 2 diverted the first third and properly cut the 2/3 within the ring. Everyone agrees that the slaughter is not valid, as when the life left the animal, i.e., when the majority of the windpipe was cut, we require the entire majority to be cut by means of slaughter, and that is not so in this case. Rav Hissa said to Rav Hun, on the contrary, let the master say the opposite. The dispute is only in the case when one diverted the knife upward toward the head of the animal, cut 1/3 of the windpipe, and then cut 2/3 within the ring. And as Rabbi Yossi, son of Rabbi Yehuda, holds that the slaughter is valid just as in the case where half the windpipe is deficient. Achatzi kana pagum. If half the windpipe was deficient, and one cut enough so that the cutting of the majority of the windpipe was complete, his slaughter is valid. And that's from the Rambam Sefer Kedusha Hilchos Shechita 111, Shulchan Aruch Yodeah 21:5. In that case, once a slaughterer cuts any additional part of the windpipe, the slaughter is valid because the cut that rendered the majority of the windpipe slaughter was performed properly. So in this case, since the cut of the second third was performed properly, the slaughter is valid. And the rabbis hold that there, in the case of a deficient windpipe, the deficiency was in the place of a proper slaughter, and therefore most of the life of the animal left in the proper place. Here, the first third was cut while the knife was diverted, and therefore most of the life of the animal did not leave in the place of proper slaughter. But in the case where one cut 2/3 of the windpipe within the ring, and then diverted the knife and cut the remaining 1/3, if one cut the majority of the windpipe in the place of slaughter, diverted the knife above this place of slaughter, and then completed cutting the windpipe, his slaughter is valid. Likewise, if he diverted the knife in the place of slaughter for the first third of the windpipe, and then cut 2/3 in the place of slaughter, his slaughter is valid, in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yossi, son of Rabbi Yehuda. And the latter version of the statement of Rav Huna citing Rav Ashi see Kesef Mishnah, the custom is to deem the slaughter invalid if one cut even a minority of the windpipe above the place of slaughter. That's the Rambam, Sefer Kedusha Shechita 313, Shulchan Aruch Yodeah 24:12, and the company of Ramah citing Mehari Wheel. Everyone agrees that the slaughter is valid, as didn't we learn in the Mishnah 27a. The halacha state of the slaughter of the majority of one simon, the windpipe or the gullet, is like that of the slaughter of the entire simon itself. Rav Yossi said to Rav Hissa, who will say to us that with regard to the Mishnah there, concerning the majority of one simon, Rabbi Yossi, son of Rabbi Yehuda, did not teach it. Perhaps Rabbi Yossi, son of Rabbi Yehuda, taught it, and the rabbis disagree. Rabbi said to Rabbi Yosef, Is that to say that with regard to all principles that address the majorities in general, Rabbi Yossi, son of Rabbi Huda, taught them? Rabbi Yosef said to him, I am speaking of the principle of majority with regard to slaughter, as we heard that the rabbis disagree with him. Some say that there's an alternative version of this discussion. Rav Huna said that Rav Ashi says, the dispute is only in a case where one diverts the knife upward toward the head of the animal, cut 1/3 of the windpipe, and then cut 2/3 within the ring. As Rabbi Yossi, son of Rabbi Huda, holds that the slaughter is valid just as it is in the case where half the windpipe is deficient. And the rabbis hold that in a case of the deficient windpipe, the deficiency was in a place of proper slaughter. But here, most of the life of the animal did not leave in the place of proper slaughter. But in a case where one cut 2/3 of the windpipe within the ring, and then they verted the knife and cut the remaining third, everyone agrees that the slaughter is valid. As didn't we learn in the mission 27a, the last stage of the slaughter of the majority of one simon, the windpipe or the gullet, is like that of the slaughter of the entire sin itself. Rav Hissa objects to this. Who will say to us that with regard to the Mishnah, they're concerning the majority of one simon? Rabbi Yossi, son of Rabbi Huda, did not teach it. Perhaps Rabbi Yossi, son of Rabbi Huda, taught it, and the rabbis disagree. Rabbi Yossi said to Rav Hissa, is that to say that with regard to all principles that address the majority in general, Rabbi Yossi, son of Rabbi Huda, taught them? Rav Hissa said to him, I am speaking on the principle of majority with regard to slaughter, as we heard that the rabbis disagree with him. If one diverted the knife and cut 1/3 of the windpipe, and then cut one third properly, and then diverted and cut the final 1/3, if one diverted the knife and cut 1/3, and then cut 1/3 properly, and then diverted and cut 1/3, his slaughter is not valid. But if one cut 1/3 of the windpipe properly, and then diverted the knife and cut 1/3, and then cut the final 1/3 properly, his slaughter is valid. This ruling is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Huda, to which Rav Huna conceded that the slaughter is valid, provided that the majority of the slaughter was valid. That's in the Rambam Sefer Ketush, Hilchos Shechita 313, Shulchan Aruch Yodeya 2413. And that is not the case. No. Rav Huda says to Rav, the slaughter is valid. Rav Yehuda says to Rav, the animal is a terefa, i.e. forbidden. Rav Huna says that Rav says the slaughter is valid, as when the life left the animal, it was in the course of a valid slaughter that it left. Rav Yehuda says that Rav says the animal is a terefa, and you require the majority of the windpipe to be cut with valid slaughter, and that is not the case. Terefa ba'enan ruba b'shchita. The Rambam explains that the fundamental dispute is that Rav Huna considers diverting the knife as an act of slaughter that is not valid, despite the fact it is performed in the place of slaughter. Therefore, the status of the slaughterer depends upon when the majority of the windpipe, the second third, was cut properly. Rav Yehuda holds that diverting the knife is not considered to be performed in the place of slaughter at all. Therefore, as long as the majority of the windpipe was slaughtered properly, the slaughter is valid and makes no difference whether the majority was cut in the middle third of the windpipe or in the final third. And the commentaries cite a version of the reason for the opinion of Rabbi Huda. At the time when the life leaves the animal, the majority of the windpipe must be cut proper slaughter, and that is not the case. Rashi rejects that version, as according to that version, Rabbi Huda requires both a majority of the windpipe to be cut with proper slaughter, and that life leave the animal by means of proper slaughter of the majority of the windpipe. However, that cannot be Rav Huda's opinion, as he states that in a case where one cuts 1/3 of the windpipe properly, then diverted the knife and cut 1/3, and then cut the final third properly, his slaughter is valid. Others suggest that the meaning of the phrase when life leaves the animal, we require a majority to be cut with proper slaughter. It is not the entire majority be cut with proper slaughter, rather it means that the majority must slaughter properly. According to that interpretation, Yehuda's opinion is understandable, as the slaughter is not valid when the first third was cut with diverting of the knife, because that 1/3 is a majority of the windpipe. By contrast, when they cut the first third properly, the slaughter is valid because the majority of the windpipe was slaughtered properly. Tosafot Harosh and Torah Chaim, and there's a picture here from, if you have a copy of this version. That's not the case. If one cut 1/3 of the windpipe properly, and then diverted the knife and cut 1/3, and then cut the final 1/3 of the windpipe properly, Rav Yehuda says that Rav said the slaughterer is valid. When the sages came and asked Rav Huna, he said to them, it is a terefa, Rabbi Yehuda heard the ruling of Rav Huna, and he was angry. He said, I deem a terefa, and he deems the slaughter a valid. And I deem the slaughter valid, and he deems it a terefa. Rav Huna said that it's probably that he was angry. One reason is that he heard it from Rav, and I did not hear it from Rav. And furthermore, there is a majority of the simon that was cut with the valid slaughter. Rav Hista said to Rav Huna, do not retract your statement, as if you retract your statement, you repudiate the first ruling that you stated with regard to a case. Stop it, please. That you stated with regard to a case where one diverted the knife and cut 1/3 of the windpipe, and then cut 1/3 properly, and then diverted and cut the final third, 1/3. There, what is the reason that you deem the slaughter valid? The reason is that when the life left the animal with the cutting of the second third of the windpipe, it left the animal in the course of a valid slaughter. Based on that reasoning, here too, when life left the animal with the cutting of the second third of the windpipe, it left the animal in the course of diverting the knife, and the slaughter is invalid. Abnamna happened to come to Surah where they asked him, if one cut 1/3 of the windpipe properly, and then diverted the knife and cut 1/3, and then cut the final 1/3 of the windpipe properly, what is halacha? He said to them, isn't that the halacha stated by Rabbi Elazar ben Menyumi? As Rabbi Elazar ben Menyumi says, slaughter that is performed like the teeth of a comb, which are jagged, is valid. And there's a picture here of it, the incision being like a comb, like up and down. If one cut the windpipe in a pattern like teeth of a comb, e.g., one diverted the knife upward toward the top of the windpipe and then pointed downward and cut, and then pointed it upward again, so that the incision is serrated like a comb, and that's the Mahari Haviv. Or one cut around the circumference of the Samanim instead of cutting straight through the Purusha, the slaughter is valid to attached. Nevertheless, it's certainly prohibited to slaughter in that manner above Nisho. Rambam Sefer Kedusha Hilcha Shechita 2:10 with Ori Odeh 21:4 and Orcha Shulchan there. The Gemara objects, and perhaps Rabbi Elazar ben Menyumi stated his halacha only when the slaughter goes up and down within the place of the proper slaughter. The Gemara asks in response, within the proper place of slaughter, what is the purpose of stating it? Clearly the slaughter is valid in that case. The Gemara explains, let's you say that we require slaughter as clean and straight, and slaughter as jagged is not straight. Therefore, Rabbi Elazar ben Menyumi teaches us that nevertheless the slaughter is valid. The Gemara cites a mnemonic for the order of the sages in the following discussion. Beit for Rabbi Abba, Kaf for Rabbi Kahana, Dalit for Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Abba sat behind Rabbi Kahana, and Rabbi Kahana sat before Rabbi Yehuda. And he sat and said to Rabbi Yehuda, if one cut 1/3 of the windpipe properly, and then they diverted the knife and cut 1/3, and then cut the final 1/3 of the windpipe properly, what is halacha? Rabbi Yehuda said to Rabbi Kahana, slaughter is valid. Rabbi Kahana then asked, if one diverted the knife and cut 1/3 of the windpipe, and then cut 1/3 properly, and then diverted and cut the final 1/3, what is halacha? Rabbi Yehuda said to him, his slaughter is not valid. Rabbi Kahana then asked, if one cut in a place where there was a perforation, shechat b'mkom nekev, if half of the windpipe was cut or deficient, and one cut the windpipe to a complete majority, and he knows that the gullet was not perforated, the slaughter is valid and the animal is not a terefa. Likewise, if one began cutting the windpipe in a place where it is intact, and he encounters a cut or deficiency that the existing cut completes the majority, the slaughter is valid according to opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. And that's in the Rambam Sefer Kedusha Hilcha Shechita 1:11, Shulchan Aruch Yodeh 21:5. In the front of the windpipe and continued cutting was halacha. Rabbi Yehuda said to him, his slaughter is valid. Rabbi Kahana further asked, if one cut the windpipe and after cutting half the windpipe encountered perforation, at what point a majority of the windpipe had been cut, was halacha? Rabbi Yehuda said to him, his slaughter is not valid. Rabbi Abba went to Eretz Yisrael and stated his halacha in the presence of Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar went and stated his halacha in the presence of Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan said to him, what is different about a case where one cut in a place where there's a perforation relative to a case where he encountered perforation in the middle of the slaughter? Rabbi Elazar said to him, in a case where one cut in a place where there was a perforation, it becomes like an animal that a Gentile began to slaughter, and a Jew completed its slaughter. What's that mean? Shechat goy v'gama Israel. If one ineligible to perform slaughter, e.g. a Gentile began slaughtering an animal, and one eligible to perform the slaughter completed the slaughter, or if one eligible to perform the slaughter began slaughtering an animal, and the slaughter was completed by one who is eligible, then the slaughter is not valid. This ruling applies only when a Gentile cut the gullet or the majority of the windpipe to the degree that the animal was rendered an unslaughtered carcass. But if the Gentile cut half the windpipe and the Jew completed cutting the windpipe, the slaughter is valid. The same halacha applies if a Jew began cutting the majority of the windpipe and the Gentile completed cutting it, based on the Gemara Hind and the Tosefta, Shulchan Aruch Yodei 210, and the Shach and the Quran there, in which case the slaughter is valid. In the case of one cut the windpipe and encountered perforation, it becomes like an animal that a Jew began to slaughter and then to complete its slaughter, in which case the slaughter is not valid. Rabbi Yochanan mockingly proclaimed about him, Gentile, Gentile, i.e., you merely repeat something about Gentiles. Rabbi Yochanan did not accept the distinction. Rabbi said, Rabbi Yochanan did well when he proclaimed about him, Gentile, Gentile. Granted there, in the case where a Gentile completed the slaughter, since a Jew was supposed to cut the majority of the windpipe but he does not cut it, when life left the animal, it left by hands of a Gentile. But here, after all, he was the one who slaughtered the entire animal, and the animal is not a tereif until this point. So what difference is there to me if one began to cut in a place where there is a perforation, and what difference is there to me if he encountered a perforation? The Mishnah. One who slaughters from the sides of the throat, Hashoche min has dadin. One must slaughter the animal from the middle of the throat, but if he slaughtered from the sides of the throat, the slaughter is valid. It is valid only if he moved the simonim to the side on which he is cutting, and he is certain that he cut the simonim before he cut the neck bone. The later commentaries ruled that the slaughter is valid even if he did not move the simonim. Rambam Sefer Kedusha Hilchot Shechita 19, Shulchan Aruch Yodei 23, and the tax and the Guada. The slaughter is valid. Hashoche min hazdadin shichoser kashewa. Although the phrase the slaughter is valid indicates that it is valid after the fact, Rashi writes it is permitted Abba Misho, in contrast to pinching, with regard to which is written adjacent to its oref, which means from behind, and therefore pinching from the sides is not valid. The requirement for the slaughter of an animal is that the simonim be cut. That's from the Rashba on 20a, which can be accomplished from the sides. Other early commentators understand that one may not slaughter from the sides of Abavnisha unless he break the neck bone before cutting the simonim, as the simonim are soft and will be moved aside by the knife. That's what's in the Rambam, which would render the animal a tereif. By contrast, if one slaughters from the front, neck bone will prevent the simonim from being moved aside. Even if the neck bone is not broken when slaughtering from the sides, it's permitted Abavnisha because cutting from the sides will cause suffering of living beings and to run, or due to concern that the knife will become notched by means of the neck bone, and that's in the Meiri. Others understand Rashi to mean that the term from the sides is referring to the sides of the actual simonim, not the sides of the throat of the animal. One who pinches the neck of a bird offering from the sides. One pinches the nape of a bird offering adjacent to its occipital bone. If one pinches the burnt offering or sin offering from the side of the neck, the pinching is not valid, and its halachic status is as though he strangled or stabbed the bird. The entire nape of the neck is fit for pinching, and that's from the Rambam Sefer Hilchot Matzah Kabbalah 6.3. It's pinching. Malika, pinching. Doves and young pigeons sacrificed as offerings in the temple were not killed by which to slaughter with a knife like other offerings, but rather by pinching the napes of the necks. This was considered an especially difficult procedure to perform. The priest would hold the bird in his left hand with its legs and wings between his fingers, and the back of the neck stretched out and facing upward. With his right fingernail, in which he grew especially long for this purpose, the priest would cut the bird's neck and spine from the nape until he severed its gullet, windpipe, or both of them, depending upon the offering. The bird was to be sacrificed as a burnt offering. The priest would completely sever its head. If it was designated as a sin offering, he would leave the head attached. Not valid. One who slaughters from the nape, the oath of the neck, his slaughter is not valid. The reason is that in that case it is inevitable that neck bone along with the spinal cord be the first cut, and when he severs the samonim, it will turn out that he slaughtered an animal or bird that is a terefa. The Gemara 28 explains that the reason the slaughter is not valid is not because the slaughter was from the nape, rather it is due to the cutting of the neck bone. Therefore, if he pulls the man behind the neck bone and cut them, the slaughter is valid and may do so even above nisho. Cheating mechubeses per Torah. One who pinches a bird offering from the nape of the neck, his pinching is valid. One who slaughters from the throat, his slaughter is valid. One who pinches a bird offering from the throat, his pinching is not valid. And the entire nape is valid for pinching, and the entire throat is valid for slaughter. What does that mean? Slaughter is performed at the throat. The entire throat is fit for slaughter at the top of the throat toward the head of the beginning of the incline of the thyroid cartilage and below. Slaughter abomination should be performed from the large upper ring and below. The lower boundary is a place that the tip of the lung reaches when the animal extends its neck to graze or when the lung is inflated. That's November Sefer Kedusha, Hechach 6:1, Yochanan 20:21. It is found that which is valid for slaughter is not valid for pinching, and that which is valid for pinching is not valid for slaughter. With regard to the statement of the Mishnah, one who slaughters an animal from the oref, his slaughter is not valid. The Gemara asks, what is the meaning of oref? If we say there's a reference to the actual occipital bone at the rear of the skull, why does this halacha apply specifically to one who slaughters from the oref? Even if one pinches a bird offering from the oref, it would also not be valid, as the merciful one states, pinch off his head adjacent to its oref, in Leviticus 5:8, and the nape beneath the occipital bone, and not its oref. Rather, what is the oref mentioned in the Mishnah? It is adjacent to the oref, on the back of the neck below the occipital bone, as it is taught in the latter clause of the Mishnah. The entire nape is valid for pinching. The Gemara asks, from where are these matters derived? They are derived as the sages taught in a Braita. In the case of adjacent to mimul its oref, adjacent means a place that sees the oref. Ro es oref sees the oref. Okay, so this is a picture of a bird here in the footnote, and not is the oref itself. And likewise, the verse states, and they reside adjacent to the mimule. Numbers 22:5. What's the note here? This is a statement of Balak, king of Moab, about the children of Israel who arrived in a place adjacent to his land. It indicates that the word mul referred to an entity that is not immediately adjacent. In this context, it does not refer to an area immediately adjacent to the occipital bone at the rear of the skull. Rather, the reference to any place where there is no obstruction between it and the occipital bone. And the verse states, "For they have turned their oref unto me, not their face." Jeremiah 2:27. The Gemara asks, what is added by the latter proof? Introduced with the term on the verse states. The Gemara answers, if you would say, we do not know where the oref itself is, so that we will not know where adjacent to it is, come here, for they have turned their oref unto me and not their face, from which it may be ascertained by inference that the oref is opposite the face at the rear of the head. Son of Rabbi Chia. B'nai Rabbi Chia. Yehuda and Hiskiah, son of Rabbi Chia, were twins who were born to their mother Yehudit 3 months apart. In their youth, they ascended with their father to Eretz Yisrael from Babylonia. At that point, they were all prominent Torah scholars, to the extent that the sages said that Rabbi Chia and his son re-established the Torah in Eretz Yisrael. When they reached Eretz Yisrael, they and their father were disciples of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, and were especially beloved and valued. In several places, the Gemara relates that they were extremely righteous individuals whose prayers were answered. Like their father, they did not earn their livelihood from Torah, but engaged in agriculture and commerce. The sons of Rabbi Hill are often mentioned together, but there are times when they are mentioned separately. Yehuda, who occasionally had the honorific Beribi, meaning prominent, attached to his name, married the daughter of Rabbi Yanai, one of the prominent sages of that generation. Yehuda was highly regarded and died young. During the lifetime of his father Hiskiah, redacted an anthology of the Braitot, which are taught with the phrase the school of Hiskiah taught, and is quoted extensively in both the Babylonian Talmud and the Jerusalem Talmud. He and Rabbi Yochanan frequently engaged in halachic dispute. The sons of Abba did in Tiberias were buried there alongside their father. Say, how is the mitzvah of pinching a bird offering performed? One moves the two simonim. There's a picture here of somebody pinching a bird's neck, and the position of the nails and the where they pinch it on the bird. That must be severed in a ritual slaughter, i.e. the windpipe and the gullet, behind the napes and pinches. There is dispute among the sages with regard to the meaning of the statement. There are those who say the mitzvah abomination is to pinch through the spinal column first, and then pinch the windpipe and the gullet, and one may even move the simonim to behind the nape and pinch. And there are those who say the mitzvah is specifically to move the simonim behind the nape and pinch. What does this mean? The ikad amen mechadeh dafka. Since the primary component of pinching is the cutting of the simonim, if one did not move them behind the neck bone but cut the neck bone first, then pinching is not valid, says Rashi, because the bird becomes terefa before he pinches the simonim, says the Rambam. Tosafot hold that even according to this opinion, one must move the simonim behind the neck bone ab initio. It is valid after the fact, even if one failed to do so. Interesting. The Gemara knows, and it is reasonable according to the one who says, one may even move someone behind the nape. Where does one draw that conclusion? It is from the fact that the mission teaches one who slaughters from the nape of the neck, his slaughter is not valid. One who pinches from the nape of the neck, his pinching is valid. And that's the end of the Amud. I'd like to wish you a Gemara Chatima Tova, only good things for the new year, and all the best. Take care. Bye.